What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Contrarian. For those of you who might be new to this channel, my name is Logan. I really like to talk about big picture events in the economy, especially in the markets. Basically, the bits of changes here and there that come up, which will affect people the most going forward. And today I'll be talking about a recent article written by Alasdair Macleod. He's a expert in the field of commodities, of macroeconomic investing, of portfolio management. He has over 4 decades of experience. So today I'll be going through, not completely, but mainly through the main bullet points of a recent article he wrote titled Living with Contracting Bank Credit. And he released this just August 24th on his website, GoldMoney. Basically, he goes through the effects that the current tightening cycle on a global scale will have on fiat currencies, and effectively the corner that all central banks have backed themselves into with papering over past recessions, effectively bailing everybody out, how that doesn't bode well for them in the coming future. But he really walks us through in detail what contracting bank credit means for GDP, what it means for commodities, how that'll put pressure on central banks increasingly to go back to easy monetary policy, something that they are really saying that they would not do right now. So just talking about his first major point in the first paragraph is the effect on the non-financial economy will be to cause nominal GDP to slump because every transaction that makes up GDP is settled through credit. Nearly all of it is bank credit. Contracting bank credit will simply drive GDP into the ground. But bank credit also drives financial activities. Its long-term expansion having driven bond yields down, equities up, and expanding derivatives market to a 700 trillion monster. A credit contraction undermines financial asset values and associated derivatives market. This article looks at the inadequacies of Basel III regulations in this context. Every 10 years or so, there is a banking crisis due to the bankers attempting to reduce lending risk. 14 years since the Lehman failure, this cycle's downturn is now overdue. The indications are that the cycle of bank credit contraction is just beginning. So to start off, Alasdair really lays out the kind of backdrop that we're currently facing is that all central banks are wanting to fight inflation. They're wanting, most of all, to restore trust into their currencies. Essentially, if people on a broad scale lose trust in fiat currencies, if they lose trust in the central bank's ability to maintain fiat currencies, they will effectively, that effectively causes a shift towards the eventual debasement of these currencies because people just, cash in every single paycheck they have. They go buy necessary items for life, whether it be food, energy, whether it be putting the money into stores of value like gold or silver. Basically, a loss in trust means that the system as it is in fiat currencies crumbles apart. And he basically, Alasdair talks about Jamie Dimon's recent warning about an economic hurricane coming up and how Jamie Dimon is likely just referring to this contraction in bank credit as the economic hurricane. Jamie Dimon's a very prominent figure when it comes to international banking. He's the head of JP Morgan. So this is effectively, Alasdair says, it's probably the most important warning since Michael Burry shorted the 2007 mortgage bond market. And it came from, not from an obscure trader, but from the world's most important commercial banker. So basically, Alasdair goes on to say, what is nominal GDP, which is used to measure economic performance? It is no more nor no less than the deployment of credit for qualifying transactions making up GDP. So effectively, a contraction in bank credit in basically the reverse of easy monetary policy, it just reverses all of the same trends that have gone along with it of ever lower bond yields, ever higher equity prices. And so it leads to a contraction of GDP basically across the board. So yeah, as GDP rises and falls, not driven by consumers, but by changes in the availability of bank credit. So that's a big important point, is that GDP really at this point has to do with bank credit and easy money. He then goes into the dissenting view. Basically, he talks about how there's effectively a group blindness, a herd mentality when it comes to all of the people in these central banks around the world, how they do not understand the cycle of bank credit and its implications. Effectively, from the major central banks to banking regulators, a group thinking blindness causes irregular booms and busts is evident. So unfortunately, while we might like to think that those who are in the US Central Bank, the Fed, or the ECB or other central banks, we might like to think that they are, well educated in what they are doing. In fact, they are somewhat blinded by the fact that they are surrounded by a cohort who basically all have the same experience and same lack of experience when it comes to leading a central bank. So he goes on to say, few bankers seem to realize that they are trapped in a cycle of bank credit of their own creation. That is why the cycle has existed for as long as credit statistics have been available, but combine a lack of understanding or the cause of the cycle with the absence of shareholder responsibility, and we can expect the management of large banks to think that with regulatory support they can trade their way out of economic downturns by simply adhering to the regulations. The consequences is that when the crisis happens, it will be least expected by large sections of the international banking community, and how this was basically what happened back in 2007, 2008. They did not see that this was coming. So yeah, this is somewhat disappointing in that right now it would appear that Jerome Powell is actually believing, and this is going off of this is not necessarily Alasdair's own words, but Jerome Powell right now believes that he can actually be the next Paul Volcker, without really realizing that Volcker had a whole different backdrop of macroeconomic conditions back then. So things like that that really point out that times have really changed since Paul Volcker, and unfortunately those in charge of central banks don't seem to really realize this, and even realize that bank credit has plays the most important role in GDP. And then Alasdair goes into the effective leverage that we've reached, how it's never been greater. So while interest rates were suppressed by central banks and official consumer price inflation remained at or close to the official 2% growth target, commercial banks were increasing their balance sheet leverage. In both the Eurozone and Japan, commercial banks geared themselves so that today global systemically important banks in both jurisdictions have asset to equity balance sheet ratios averaging over 20 times. And this is a lot worse than even the US. As much as I like to harp on the US central bank, the Eurozone and Japan are arguably twice as worse as the Fed in terms of their balance sheet. So effectively, the starting point for credit contraction could hardly be worse. That means it'll have a much worse effect when it does get going. Nevertheless, when historically bank balance sheet leverage of over 10 times might have been deemed to be verging on risky, Basel III's 33.3 times is beyond the pale. So effectively, the leverage in central banks has never been greater. Alasdair then brings up this globally systemically important banks and the equity asset to equity ratios that they have. As can be seen, the US banks are actually somewhat healthier than UK banks. China central banks are a bit comparable to US central banks. Japan goes way off the charts. Canada as well is up there, and especially the Eurozone is very high in terms of their asset to equity ratio. So effectively, this implies a reduction of deposit liabilities amounting to between 7 and 10 trillion. Not all of this will be reflected in GDP, since bank credit finances transactions in financial and capital assets as well, but nevertheless, normalizing bank credit leverage can be expected to have a substantial impact on US GDP. So bottom line is that if the Fed continues on their current path of raising rates and tightening, as other central banks are trying to do around the world, it'll have a profound effect on the US GDP, and so it'll continue to contract, and eventually it will be undeniable that we are in a recession, which we likely already are. But Alasdair essentially goes on to say that it will get a lot worse than how it even currently is. He then goes on to say the Euro system is riddled with bad debts and Japan is over leveraged. On deeper analysis, we find that the entire euro system is rotten. For example, in 2016, Italian non-performing loans were 17% of total bank assets. By March, these had magically fallen to only 4%, a record low. So basically, the euro system and Japan is in a much more precarious situation than the United States even is, as much as we all can be disappointed with our own banking system here. It's definitely not as worse as it can get. The consequences for the funding of national government budget deficits are alarming. Without the ECB expanding its asset purchasing programs to fund euro area government deficits in their entirety at a time when these deficits are also increasing materially, the whole euro system will almost certainly face collapse. As they say, inflate or die. So here we get to effectively the choice that central banks will have. They will either revert back to their easy monetary policies and attempt to paper over everything again, effectively inflating much more than they have in the past, or they will continue on their current tightening cycle and cause the whole system to fall apart. And effectively, they don't have a choice at this point. Alasdair is saying that they will choose to inflate because they will prioritize GDP and trying to maintain trust in the fiat currency systems that are in place, as opposed to allowing it to all implode, allowing GDP to fall as far as it would. So effectively, this is the direction that Alasdair believes that it will go. Basically, also derivatives have never been larger than they are today as a market. The majority of derivative dealers are divisions of commercial banks. As bank credit contraction intensifies, this raises two issues. The first is the counterparty consequences of a major bank failure, which almost always happens at this stage of the credit cycle and which must be prevented by ensuring that any bank with a derivative book is bailed. The second is the extent to which the banking cohort decides to reduce its exposure to over-the-counter derivatives as a means of reducing balance sheet leverage. So basically, derivatives market have never been greater. Effectively, he also goes into the degree to which commodities on banks' balance sheets, particularly related to gold, the paper ratio has never been greater. The actual reserves have never been lower. Essentially, demand for over 11,000 tons of gold is diverted into paper derivatives. Much of this will be reflected in unallocated bullion accounts offered by LBMA member banks to their customers. The extent to which contracting bank credit reduces the size of over-the-counter derivatives will be reflected in their withdrawal of unallocated gold deposit account facilities. If they didn't realize it before, these depositors will find that they have no rights to any physical gold. So the effect of this is that eventually people will just find that they, in fact, have no rights to any physical gold because it's been papered over so much by the COMEX market. So that is not a good effect either. So effectively, when all the precariously placed fiat dominoes begin to topple, the latter-day John Law's central bankers are bound to sacrifice their currencies on the altars of saving financial markets, GDP, and the funding of rapidly deteriorating state finances. It is probably at that stage that the public will begin to abandon all hope for the purchasing power of their fiat currency. So Alasdair says that central banks will go with the option to inflate. They will not allow their system to die just of their own choosing. But inflation will effectively kill it as people broadly begin to realize that central banks are trapped. I already think it's pretty obvious in my opinion, but as is evident, apparently people still think that it's possible for the Fed to reverse its balance sheet at this point, that it's possible for other central banks to do the same globally. Alasdair really points out that once you reach a certain threshold, which we are well beyond, it is not possible to go back, and effectively central banks have pinned themselves into a corner They didn't realize they were doing it at first, but at this point they are trapped. They have to either inflate and try to paper over all of these systemic issues, or they simply go on the current path and allow the system to crumble in front of their own eyes. A common thread that I'm hearing out there right now that people are saying that, oh, central banks, they are purposely going to collapse the system by tightening, because that brings about the Great Reset kind of thing. I'm not going to really dive in depth into that argument, but I would counteract that if, in fact, central banks are trying to bring about the Klaus Schwab's Great Reset in some sort of manner, I would actually argue that they would want to inflate away the currencies, that they would want to cause all of these currencies, fiat currencies globally, to go through hyperinflation, eventually become worthless. In that kind of a scenario, you effectively destroy all of the systems that are in place right now, and you make way for something to come about, whether it's a universal or a basket of central bank digital currencies, or just one central bank digital currency or whatever. That would be a scenario in which I would actually say is more likely in that kind of agenda, as opposed to just trying to collapse the system by over tightening. That's just personally my thoughts. I know that some people are saying that, no, central banks this time, they are not going to go back to QE infinity. They're not going to paper everything over this time because they want to purposely crash everything to go into the Great Reset. I'm just saying that it's much more likely, if they actually do want to do this for Klaus Schwab, that they would go the route of causing hyperinflation and a total loss of trust by the consumers in the banking systems around the world. That would just be my personal thoughts regarding this. So I don't think it's likely that central banks are trying to bring about the Great Reset by going along their current path of tightening, ever contracting bank credit and collapsing the system that way. But all that being said, that's a side note, just responding to some comments I've seen out there in the past. All this being said, we will really have to wait and see where all of this goes. It is coming to a point where central banks, especially in Europe, in Asia, are beginning to have to turn to be more dovish, even though inflation continues to be a hot issue, especially in Europe with the energy and, frankly, the social crisis that is beginning to emerge in Europe. Central banks are beginning to have to pivot despite inflation still being very high. I believe that in the US, eventually they will reach that point as well, although we aren't quite there yet. So we'll definitely have to see how Alasdair's major points here play out in the coming few months. I don't think it's going to be a matter of years until it takes the US central bank to pivot. Likely is going to be in a matter of just a few months here. But all this being said, let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, just consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribing to this channel, and I hope to see you all again at some point.